Hey there, this is Ill Factor, and I'm so glad you're watching this video because I'm going to be sharing with you some techniques that I personally use to get my 808 subs sitting well in the mix. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Now, there are many ways to arrive at getting a great 808 sound in your projects. Whether you're sound designing with a synthesizer and manipulating a sine waveform, or you're just starting off with a great sounding sample. These are just some of the techniques that I use in my current workflow to arrive at the sound that I'm really looking for. So in this case, I start by just using a great 808 sampled sound. And the sub that we're looking at here, the 808 sample, is one that you could find in a free downloadable a kit that I've created, and this is absolutely yours for free. So at the end of this video, I'm going to show you how you can access that and incorporate this into your current projects. So right now we've got an 808 sample loaded into Ableton Live's Simpler, and I'll just go ahead and trigger that with my MIDI controller. And I do recommend you at least listen to this in headphones or some studio monitors so that you can, appreciate the low end coming from this sample. But I'll go a couple octaves higher. So the sample sounds great, and I'm a big believer of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If you've watched any of my videos, you know that I don't like to overcomplicate things. I like just to keep things simple, and if they sound great, and to get great sounds, just start with great samples. And so I keep things simple. That way it just doesn't interrupt my workflow of having to do so much tweaking on the front end, and I can just get to where I want to get to creatively. So let me go ahead and play the beat and the arrangement, and in the context with the sub the way it's sounding now, and I'll walk you through a couple things that I'm going to do to actually bring and add some more characteristics to this 808 and have it actually sit well with the rest of the tracks. Okay, so the sub very much covers a lot of the low end, and that's good, but it doesn't really stick out, doesn't come through, and it's not actually just as aggressive as I'd like it to be. So what we're going to do is just leaving the sample alone the way it is, and as it comes into the kit. Let's just double click that to get it out of the way. I like to use the amp plugin that comes in Ableton Live, the stock amp plugin that comes in here. And I love this because what it does is it adds this great distortion harmonics all across the low end, the 808, and it really gives a nice, both it brings out the punchiness of the 808, but more importantly just adds some really good aggressive grit to this. So let's go ahead and solo the sub, and I'm gonna go ahead and put the amp on, and you can see the difference. So let's play that again with the amp. Now that's going to help the sub have a lot more presence, and particularly, especially now with the rest of the elements in the tracks, in the project. Sorry. So let me walk you through a little bit of why I have the amp set to where it's at. Now, I'm just really creating a good balance. And if you're not familiar with how to manipulate this or even get the tone you're looking for, I would strongly suggest that you place a reference in there. Has something that you can reference, something that you like to hear, particularly like, if you're listening to a certain track and you're like, I really love the way that 808 sounds. It sounds gritty, sounds very saturated. And you just bring that into the mix and just start A-Bing so you can go back and forth to get as close as you can to that sound. So here I'm just messing around with the gain to actually get more of the amplified saturation effect onto the sub. So with minimal gain, you really won't hear a lot of the distortion come through. So let's just have the gain all the way down. And it's just the same as it was. The more you start to crank the gain, so that gets nice and dirty. So I don't want it to get too extreme, so I'll just find a nice balance. I think I had it around here. And then you can use the onboard EQ here. It's just very basic, 3 bands, a little bit more treble, mids, and I'll leave it like that. Now you just play by ear. And now the dry and wet, I also play too. Now, like I said, I'm just manipulating to actually start finding out a good sweet spot with this, because too much of the processing might eliminate a lot of the characteristics that I love from the 808 to begin with. So when I start bringing down, it just adds just a nice shimmer of the grit that I'm looking for, and that's gonna help have that 808 cut through in the mix. This is without the amp. And you see how it's subby, it's got the low end, but now with the amp, so that makes it nice, and that distortion and the harmonics is being added on there. I'm not trying to get into too fancy or anything, but it starts to give more life to the top end, so it actually can be heard in the mix. So now I'm going to add a little bit of compression to this, and the way I'm looking at this whole compression is I want to have the immediate attack of the sub just come down a little bit, and I'm letting the release. I'm giving it some more release time, so it just takes its time while it's compressing this. Here's a great way to kind of use this compressor on Ableton Live to actually kind of visually see what's happening in the compressor. So you'll see that once the audio passes this threshold, the compressor starts to do its work. So now that I've added some of the distortion along with the, I'm blending in some of the amp distortion with the low end, I'm using a compressor to give me a nice, well-balanced signal. Kind of even out the distortion and the low end that comes with that. And that's good. What I can do is I can give a little bit more gain to get more of that top end, and we're going to shave that off with using an EQ. So you're looking at this EQ, and then you see, so what was the point of having this amp if all you're going to do is take away the top end? Well, watch what happens when we take the amp off and still have the EQ on. Okay, so we'll take the amp off. Nothing really different. But add the amp in there and still have the EQ, even though it's cutting off all this high end, it still gives the characteristic and life to the 808 that I'm looking for. Now this is without the EQ. Now this is with the EQ. So it's almost like I want it to be distorted and saturated, but yet I don't want the distortion to get the spotlight. I just want that 808 to be aggressive, mean, and very much kind of like in your face. And not a lot of processing is really going on. A lot of the character of this 808 comes from this amp, the amp simulator. So you could go ahead and try the different types of amps, the simulation that it has. Right now I have it set to heavy. All the other ones really provide a different type of gain, and I'll walk you through some of them so you can hear the difference. So the one I liked the most was heavy, and when you use the bass one, it's almost as if it has none of that the top harmonics and things like that. The top gritty heavy stuff that you would hear. And when I mean top, what I mean is that the higher end of the frequency spectrum, the higher frequencies that allow you to hear more of the distortion and things like that. Yeah, heavy's dope. Heavy's heavy. And now I'm going to use the EQ to get rid of those top end and still make it feel aggressive. Then once I've got the EQ to kind of shape the tone of that 808, I'm going to use a compressor again, but in this case, what we're doing is sidechaining. And what I'm going to sidechain this to is I go over here to my drum rack, and I'm going to go into here and choose the kick that I'm using. Or in this case, since I'm using multiple kicks, I think it's a lot easier to just use an EQ and allow a specific frequency. In this case, I'm using a low pass, meaning I'm only letting the lows pass through. Right? So in this case, I'm going to use an EQ sidechain, and that's all this really is. This means that anything below 169 hertz will be triggering the sidechain compressor, would be triggering this compressor to react. So, and I did this because I have multiple kicks happening, and it would be hard for me to just dictate one kick to trigger this. So this is a great technique to use to have if you've got like 4 or 5 kicks going off on the drum rack. Just use an EQ and have the low end trigger that specific compressor. Now the reason why this is really the big key element to this whole thing, because I want the sub to get out of the way of the kick, and this is what's going to give this audio illusion to make the sub sound like it has a huge punch to it, and that punch is in reality coming from the kick drum. And so a lot of times when I would hear these records, whether they're trap or some of these 808 heavy records, I would notice, man, how did they get that 808 to punch? And the punch is just secretly coming from the kick. It's just that we're sidechaining it so that the sub actually kind of gets out of the way, but provides enough beefy low end for that kick to feel huge and big, and still provide life to that low end and getting out of the way to give the punch. So here's the difference. We'll start with having the compressor on. And so when I take the compressor off, pay close attention to the initial kick. Every time you hear the kick, does it pop a little more with the sidechain compression on, or is it still dull? It actually feels like the 808 has more punch to it. I know it's weird because we're ducking it, but this is a cool little trick that I like to use to get that 808 to get out of the way, but yet it actually gives more life into the attack of it because the kick is stealing the show. So let me go ahead and see what this sounds like in context with everything else. And then once I have all the other elements playing, I can fine tune the sub to sit well within the mix of everything else. And it's okay that I can actually boost up the volume of the low end a little bit more, because it's actually ducking out of the way of the kick, and this makes a good, beautiful marriage between the drums and the sub 808. Now let's take the amp off. Let's put the amp back on. Let's crank up the mix a little bit. So if you wanted it to be a bit more aggressive, just go ahead and turn up a little more of the dry wet. You can also crank a lot more low end from the bass here, and that's going to add some more sub harmonics to the lower frequencies, giving a nice, rich, full low end boost. And then just crank a little bit of the gain if you want some more of that grit in there. So these are just some of the techniques that I'm currently using in my workflow to get my 808 subs to sit where I want them to in my projects. I hope this was a helpful video for you. And as my gift to you for watching this video, I'd love to give you the 808 sub sample that we use. I've already put it in a customized, simpler, already for you to use, loaded in any of your projects. Just go ahead and download the link in the description box below, and you can go ahead and download a free Ableton Live kit that I put together, including this sub in there, along with loops, effects, and vocal chains and things like that you can start using in your projects right away. And so what you can do is, once you've downloaded the zip file, you'll find a folder with the sub instrument, and you could just click, drag, and drop that into your sessions, and hopefully you'll be able to load that up and use it immediately. So once again, thank you for watching this video. Click the link below in the description box to download that. It's my gift to you. Also, to stay updated with upcoming videos, go ahead and hit subscribe, and see you soon.